Okay. So let's go ahead and get started. Thanks for being here. And for people at Zoom, thank you for being here this morning. As you know, today more than ever, we really need to address certain policies in the workplace. But, even though yoga teaching doesn't necessarily always feel like work, it is. And when we engage with students, customers, people that we work with, it's really important that we are not just considerate of the task at hand, but also people's feelings, emotions, and boundaries. And so today's continuing education class is focused on these principles that Yoga Alliance has helped create and Tom has expanded on, and hopefully, even though most of you, I guess, I'm sure, are aware of Yoga Alliance policy, it's really important that we go over it, and we do get some continuing education credit for this. At the end, we will be taking questions, so if you'd like, you can write down your questions, and then we'll go over them towards the end of class.
Or you can ask them in real time. If there's something that's unclear, then please ask a question so we can clarify.
Yes. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. And FYI, there is an exam at the end of this, so please pay close attention. Be as present as you can. If you're at home, just try to be in a place or an area that isn't distracting you, because the exam is important. It helps us to understand that you understood the information we were sharing with you.
And are you sending the people
I
at
already
home
sent
the
it to them.
exam?
I already sent it in a separate email. So you guys should have the links for all the handouts, and you also have the last email I sent you has an attached PDF of the yoga ethics exam.
And I added an 8th question. Was that?
That was the last, yes, the very last email you sent, yes.
Okay.
I did it as I was driving here.
Oh, there's
Don't
that ethics question.
It was at red light. It was at a red light, so. Okay. So this is Tom Capshew. Most of you guys know who he is, but for those of you at home who may not know Tom, he has been a big part of our community here as far as teaching energy work and his Consciousness Rising program. But he's also a licensed counselor, and I'll let him share more information about himself before we get started. I'm Linda Osorio. I'm the owner of Stafford House of Yoga, co-owner, and also have led this community since 2012. Been in the health and wellness industry since 2007, and very excited to continue growing with everyone, but still staying aligned with principles that are important as we continue to grow our studio.
So many of you know me personally from your interactions with me, but a lot of you don't know my background. So I'll give you some of the things that I've done that have informed me for being competent to teach an ethics course. So some of you know that I'm a former attorney. I practiced law in Florida for 7 years. Decided that didn't really make my heart sing, so I went back and got a master's and PhD in social work. While I was in Florida, I was on the board of directors of a hospice and developed an ethics committee back when Jack Kevorkian was doing all his assisted suicide stuff. I'm a licensed clinical social worker in Virginia. I served when I lived in Iowa. I served on the Iowa Board of Social Work Examiners, which is a licensing board for social work in Iowa. I taught business and ethics at a massage school, Windermere Institute of Healing Arts, for 7 years, and have been a family therapist at a substance abuse treatment center, couples therapist, family therapist, individual therapist here in private practice in Fredericksburg, Virginia. So I guess the main thing that brings my expertise here, kind of the overarching thing, is I've worked in and studied and helped people with relationships for several years, and that's really where ethics and yoga comes into play. So glad to be here. Got lots of expertise, but you know me as Tom. So Linda's going to start with our day, our time together is going to be basically Linda's going to talk a little bit and remind us about in-class ethics, and then I'm going to talk about what can happen outside of class and go through the Yoga Alliance policies and procedures, and then we've got an exam that will have some real life or possible real life situations that will both have you take the exam on and then process and talk through as application of the information. So, take it away.
So, yoga teachers, as you know, we are leading students through movement, but we're also leading them sometimes on an emotional level. So, we don't understand where a student is when they come in. We don't understand where they were before they walked into class, emotionally, maybe even physically. And it's really important that before we start class, that we ground ourselves, that we take time to get ourselves in a state of present moment awareness. So one of the things that I suggest you do, and some of you may have already started doing this, but if you haven't, maybe find something that will support you, or use my suggestions for sure. But find something that will help you before you start class. Whether it's in your car, or if you come to class and you find a little space, a corner, maybe it's outside of the studio, maybe it's in the studio. Find a small little quiet space, and just for about a minute, if you can, take time to close your eyes, or if you like, keep them softly open, and just find yourself in a place of awareness of where you are in your environment and in your body. What I like to do is I like to take time to breathe, even if it's just 5 conscious breaths. Taking that moment for myself to be in the moment with the students is part of, I think, the skills of being a yoga teacher. But we have to first do it for ourselves if we want to offer that for a student. So again, taking time to breathe, inhale, watching the breath, exhale, watching the breath, just like you teach your students. Do it for yourself. Also, you can use mantras, whatever that will support you through that class. Also, just noticing what you're looking at is another option. So if you're looking at a picture, connecting with it, noticing shapes, shadows, and colors, and without judgment, just noticing what you're looking at. It could even just be the room. That will help you get more in the moment, grounded into the moment. That's really important. And then, so when you move into class, now with COVID, social distancing is a requirement, with a mask on, of course. But if you don't have a mask and you're encountering people on your way in, 6 feet is the required amount of space between you and the student. So please be mindful of that for as long as we need to. We'll let you know and you'll know, I'm sure, when that's over. But in the meantime, still keep in mind that that distance is important, even even if COVID is over. We still need a safe distance between students, especially when they're new. We're not familiar with the student, so don't get too close to them. Making sure that you have, I would say, let's say COVID wasn't around, I would say 3 to 4 feet, is a safe distance. But with COVID, 6 feet minimum. And as you encounter students, eye contact is very important to let them know you recognize them. So there's a difference, I believe, from like looking at someone in the eye and just kind of reading them versus eyeballing them. Like, okay, so remember, your eye contact says a lot about you. So it's not just how our body is, but how our eyes are. Or if you're just staring at somebody like this, like I'm making eye contact with you, my eyeballs are real big, like, oh my God. So be aware. And of course, you can only do this if you're present in the moment. If you can catch yourself, oh, I'm eyeballing them, or, I'm catching myself, maybe thinking of something and it's being expressed through my look on my face. So I think that's very important. So as you get to meet your student, make sure that your eye contact with them is of good nature, and that you are at least connecting with them, letting them know, like, I see you. But again, keeping that distance so that you're not too closed in and making them feel uncomfortable. After you have greeted your client or your student with your eyes, or even the other staff members, from there you can decide if you want to greet them with your words. And words, as you know, are powerful. So make sure that, especially when they're new students, that you're greeting them cordially, so that you're not assuming that they are going to be okay with slang, or and even then I would probably steer away from it unless you're really familiar with the student, like your friends or something. And then we'll talk about that whole thing, friendship with your students, in just a moment. But just, saying hello, how are you? Or let me know if you need anything. So you want to feel approachable if they're, let's say, having a problem, but you want to do it in a way that's professional. So use professional words and terms, especially if you are just meeting the student for the first time. Making sure that they have everything that they need, the block, the strap. Everything should be related within your code of conduct, within your scope of practice. It shouldn't be, this subject matters that aren't related to yoga should probably be addressed later, and we'll talk about that. But try to encounter and engage with your student on a professional level based on what you're about to teach them or work with them on, even if it's a private session. Keep it as professional as possible with your words. So as you're teaching the class, there are, as you know, as a yoga teacher, different ways that we cue or we share information to the student. And how we say things, again, is important even here. So be really specific, and we're not going to get into teaching skills, but try not to use words that they could misinterpret, and they'll be, they'll in their own mind take that word in a different direction. Try to be just really clear, really specific, and use professional yoga terms. I'm not going to get too deep on what words and language we can use. You know that professional language is best. And there are times that, yes, you can be casual and laugh, but you don't want to ever point anybody out specifically and make them feel like they're a target. Like, so this is not, so look at Jack. This is how you don't do the pose. So you wouldn't do that and put someone on the spot. There are times that yoga teachers do go, great job, Nicole, great job, Joe, your pose looks excellent. I feel these terms are fine, but even then, I would talk to the student prior to make sure you have that relationship, and we'll get deeper into that in just a moment. I think the biggest thing that I'd like to concentrate on during my time is touch. So as you know, with the COVID pandemic that we're in, we have the social distancing. But there was a time where hands-on adjustments was acceptable. And still is if you're doing private lessons or if you're working with the student one-on-one and you get permission. There's been a lot of controversy in Yoga Alliance and in the yoga community about hands-on assist because of some issues that have arisen in other studios or other places with a teacher-student relationship that created an environment that was felt unsafe for the student. Mostly, this is, what's typical is it's a male, either teacher or student, but it's usually opposite sex, not to say that same sex couldn't do that, that there tends to be that tension or that sense of uneasiness if you are a male teacher, especially. It seems to be something that some females might be a little bit more standoffish. That doesn't mean that female teachers can't or are not giving that same feeling to, let's say, a male student or another female student. Every student has a different experience that they're coming in with, and we don't know what their life was like prior to yoga. And even during yoga, there could be some trauma that they're going through, even currently, that we're not aware of. It could have been a relationship with their spouse that they're working through, or it could be many years ago with their childhood. We have to approach our students as if there is that possibility versus approaching them like nothing has ever happened. I would say that 9 times out of 10, not that I'm an expert at this, but based on my experience as a massage therapist and a yoga teacher, there's been more people who have experienced some kind of trauma than hasn't. And we have to approach this very mindfully as we teach them, physically and emotionally. So when you encounter your student and let's say they're in a posture that does not look like it's safe, you might, as a teacher, want to immediately go to them and either adjust them or touch them or redirect them somehow. And you would enter their space, their personal space, and they may, even just you entering their personal space, begin to have a reaction. Maybe that fight or flight will kick in, like, oh my gosh, I'm doing something wrong. Though you have good intentions, we have to kind of go into it a little bit more mindfully and approach them softly. I would always be cautious of how your voice may sound. So tone it down a little bit. 1, so you don't put them on the spot. 2, so they don't feel like you're being aggressive towards them. And 3, just to let them know that you're there to help them. So as you approach them, maybe don't rush in. I'm sure that for most of the time, unless you're doing inversions, you are feeling like they might hurt themselves. They usually can take care of themselves. Even if they fall, they will find a natural way to do it safely. Approach them softly and use your softer voice and just within, I would say, 3 feet or further, ask them, is it okay if I assist you? And they may say, no, I'm okay, and then that's fine, you can walk away. Just give them eye contact, let them know, okay, I respect you. The other option is to walk up to them without touching them and mirror them. So for instance, if they are in, let's say, a half moon, maybe get their attention, but you're still at a safe distance. Do the half moon and bring your hands where you would want them to see it, and you point to where the hand should go. And then they would mirror you and they'd say, oh, okay, that's a great, safe way to do it. If they give you permission to adjust them, make sure that you are using very minimal touching. So, for instance, you maybe just tap their hand or touch their foot or their knee. I would never adjust anything in the groin area and the hips without this. Uh, even now, especially, even if you got permission, I would be very careful. So, for instance, if they're in down dog, I know we go over this in our teacher training program. But if you did not take our teacher training program, there are adjustments where when they're in down dog, you pull on their hips and you pull them back. Don't do that. This is one of the biggest adjustments that there's been issues with the Yoga Alliance. So you don't want to do that unless it's, again, a family member or someone that you have written permission from, and even then I'd be really cautious. And we'll go into that deeper. But in the meantime, adjustments need to be mostly verbal, especially now today with COVID. They need to be, the second step would be to do it mirroring. And the third step, if you really feel it's necessary, is to do a hands-on adjustment, even if you're doing a private session, but avoiding any area that is too personal. So I would just tap, and this is a whole different workshop on adjustment, so I'm not going to elaborate, but I just want you to understand that touch is a very personal thing. So if you do have to touch, do it in areas that are obvious, that can support them without being too invasive or too personal. So hands, tapping their hand or their foot, and not going anywhere near the torso if you can help that. And I only add that because if you are at a point where this person looks like they're going to fall back in a back bend, right, and you bring your hands on their back, their shoulders, because you're like, oh my God, they look like they're going to stumble back. I mean, you're just using your instinct to support them. You're not trying to grope them or anything, but just try to be real mindful of how you support your student. So the other thing I'd like to share with you is the emotional state as we guide them through with our theming in class. There have been teachers, and I have encountered this in this studio, who have shared a lot of their personal beliefs on lifestyles as they taught. And I had to address this pretty quickly. And I'm just sharing with you this experience because it's real. And if you're a teacher who you just have a bad day, and it's okay to share and be vulnerable, but you have to still be mindful that your bad day shouldn't transfer to everybody else's bad day. So, for example, I had a teacher who was talking about how people shouldn't take selfies, and that's the ego, and you shouldn't post it online, and she made it seem like it, was a negative thing. Well, it just so happened that there was a student in there who actually did that for a living. And though maybe and we don't really know how she was using her social media or whatever for her career, she was deeply offended by this because she felt that I have to do this for a living. And it took her on an emotional downturn of feeling guilty and bad, that she had kind of latched out and felt like she had to, from that guilt, then went the opposite and said, no, this is wrong. I'm doing this to survive, to live. I'm not here to judge anyone as a yoga teacher, and I wouldn't recommend you do that either. That student and that teacher obviously had different beliefs. And as a teacher, you should not use that platform to take your beliefs and share them to the point that it could take over the whole energy of the class, the intention of well-being for everyone. So be really careful about what you're sharing in themes, your belief systems. Try to keep it general and positive, and make sure that if you see someone that might be reacting to what you're saying, they could be reacting by, I see this sometimes, they, like they're just fidgety in their body, or they're, just having a hard time with the seed in their face. And this is a time to maybe address them after class, again, socially distance, and just say, hey, are you doing okay? Don't feel like you have to pry anything out of a student, but be mindful and caring as you approach them, and just let them know that, I'm aware and I'm here and I'm available if you need to speak to me after class or anytime. I think in the end, we all have good intentions as teachers, but we're human too. And there are times where we are living our life and we come into the yoga studio, we come into the classroom, and we bring on at times experiences that we just left. And this is why the grounding is so important prior to teaching, prior to engaging with students. I myself have a ton of stuff going on that sometimes is, overwhelming. And I have to, even on my way to the studio or on my way, I have to practice present moment awareness to create that space, that pause, so that I'm not taking on that energy, that mentality, or words that could affect the students in the classroom. So as you continue teaching to your students, we know that it's a practice, right? Everything is a practice. See if you can continue practicing. Be mindful with your words, be mindful with your adjustments, and being caring throughout the whole experience for the student during and after the yoga class. So that's most of what I've had to share. My time is up for that part. So if you have any questions or comments, please let me know. We can also, if you think of something later, come towards it at the end of class. And if you work at the House of Yoga, we also have our policies in place. Please revise that policy, or if you need a new copy, let me know.
All right. I've got a handout that I realized I didn't send to you, Linda, so you didn't send it out to the other people. But I promise I will get it out to you guys right after class. And it's got something on both sides. The back side is a reprint of an article that I wrote back in 2005 called The Greatest Gift. It's an article that talks about creating space for healing. And that's what you do when you say yes to being a yoga teacher. You're creating a space for people to heal. Some of the people that come in just want exercise. They're not interested in healing. They're just interested in moving their body and getting some exercise. But there are people who use yoga as a form of healing. And your job is to create that space so that they can feel safe to heal in whatever way they need to. So when we talk about healing and yoga, we're mainly talking about some of the terms that's in the glossary. And I want to go through those as kind of a frame for going into the Yoga Alliance information. What we're really talking about in human relationships is power. The ability to do something, the ability to act and to accomplish things. You when you say yes to teaching a yoga class, that yes creates a power differential immediately, because you are saying yes to a role that puts you at least in perceived place of authority. You're advanced as someone who knows about yoga, who has trained for yoga teaching, who knows how to present it to people and create the space for it. So just by saying yes to I'm going to teach yoga, you've created a power differential. Every student that comes into your class may have a different response to that power differential. And you may never know what that response is. Some students will come in and say, hey, I'm a yoga teacher too. Let's see how good this person does, or, they may be comparing their own abilities with your abilities. There may be a new student who's never done yoga before that, just falls in love with the way you teach. All of those, anywhere in between can be what happens with a yoga class. So, one of the things that happens with human relationships and power is we often use a psychological mechanism called projection. Projection is putting onto somebody else your own feelings. It was developed by or advanced by Sigmund Freud. It's gone through a lot of different definitions, but basically, projection can be good or bad. You can project your bad feelings onto somebody else because you aren't willing to recognize those bad feelings. But what happens more often than not in yoga class is positive projection. So you get someone coming to yoga class that's new to yoga, and they see you as a teacher, and they're like, wow, they're so flexible, they're so knowledgeable, they do these positions so well when they model them. They're projecting their desire to improve their body and improve their life onto you. It's a psychological mechanism. It's wonderful in the sense that they then can practice themselves into that ability. When I started doing yoga again, I, was doing yoga and thinking, boy, I am so inflexible. I have so little flexibility, and I do forward fold, and and then they'd say, okay, come up to halfway. I was already at halfway trying to do a forward fold. So obviously that's advanced because I've been continuing to practice. So what projection does is it helps us to put outside of ourselves our potential and then see that potential and live into it. So projection isn't good or bad. It's just something that we all do. What happens in a lot of situations is transference, which is similar to projection in that you're attributing feelings or qualities to somebody else, but it's not your feelings. It's not you thinking that they have qualities that you don't have, but it's transferring former experiences that you've had to somebody that you meet. So this is most often seen in therapy, which can be really tricky around transference and counter-transference, which we'll talk about in a minute. But transference happens as well. So you go to a yoga class and there's a male yoga instructor and they remind you of an old boyfriend. And so you're like, boy, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. He's, rushing through things and doing all of these weird things. You're most likely doing some transference. You're taking negative feelings that you've had in the past and putting them on somebody that you don't even know. Okay? Students do that with you. You may remind them of somebody. They may feel limited in their growth or their ability to do something, and they see you doing it, and so they feel bad about you because they don't want to feel bad about themselves. So transference happens. Countertransference is you as the person in a position of authority or power, your feelings toward the students. And that happens as well. You may, feel positive countertransference toward a student. Wow, that student's really doing well. Or you may be, frustrated with a student. Why can't this person figure out this position? Why do I have to keep on correcting them all the time? Or, helping them to find it? Those are countertransference feelings that, again, transference and countertransference can be positive or negative. But it's a part of the power differential that you have to be aware of and work around. The last thing on the glossary is dual relationships. Dual relationships in therapeutic settings are any relationship that is in addition to the primary relationship of therapist and client. So in small communities, we're in a small community. The Stafford House of Yoga, Fredericksburg House of Yoga, Emerge is a small community. There's lots of opportunities for dual relationships. I have some dual relationships that I have to be very careful about how I interact with people in different settings, because I've got a relationship with them in a particular setting and then in another setting. And so the best approach as a yoga teacher is don't create a dual relationship. You may already be in a relationship with somebody and then they start taking your class. That's different. But don't go from being a teacher to being a friend or being a lover, or moving in that direction creates that dual relationship that then makes the boundary questions much more hard to navigate. So, any questions about those terms and how they apply as a yoga instructor? Okay, so let's start looking through the Yoga Alliance material. I don't know an easy way to do this without just kind of directing you through it. So we'll start with the Code of Conduct. So the Yoga Alliance in February of this year put out a whole new set of ethical guidelines. The overarching name or framework for this is the ethical commitment. So everything that we're going to talk about today includes the Yoga Alliance ethical commitment. So underneath that umbrella are several policies and procedures. We won't go through every Yoga Alliance policy and procedure today, but there's 4 main ones that we're going to cover today. One is the Code of Conduct. One is Scope of Practice. One is the Anti-Harassment Policy. And one is the Sexual Misconduct Policy. So those four components are part of this ethical commitment that teachers make and schools make to the ethical requirements that have been promulgated by the Yoga Alliance. So all of you should have a copy of the Code of Conduct, and we're just going to go through it, and I'm going to hit some of the highlights of it.
Nicole, do you want me to move your phone? Yeah, she had extra, so she.
Okay.
So everybody's got a Code of Conduct. Okay, so if you start with the preamble, it talks about the code is centered on the principles of the yamas. So I'm sure that's part of what you covered in your yoga teacher training, but that's non-harming, truthfulness, not stealing, self-restraint, and simplicity or non-attachment. And so the code is fashioned around the historical teachings of yoga from its origins in India. The Code of Conduct has 8 different principles, and what I can tell you is that the Code of Conduct and the scope of practice are interlaced, so they refer back to each other, and so there's some duplication, but we'll just kind of work through those 8 principles. If you look at principle number 1, basically says you have to follow all applicable law when you're practicing, when you're a teacher. Code principle number 2 basically refers and incorporates the whole scope of practice, which we'll go over in detail after we go through the Code of Conduct. Code principle 3 references and incorporates the anti-harassment policy, which we'll also go over in detail after we go through the Code of Conduct. Code principle number 4 then goes into and incorporates the sexual misconduct policy, which we'll also go into in greater detail. Code principle 5, do no harm. Code principle 5 prohibits for the purpose of safety the member from teaching yoga while under the influence of alcohol or drugs. So unless you're taking a prescription that was prescribed to you. This particular principle indicates that even if there's jurisdictional legality, say you're teaching in Washington, D.C., where marijuana is decriminalized, you're still required to not teach under the influence of marijuana because it's not a prescription drug that you were prescribed. If you happen to be prescribed marijuana, then you'd be all right. But it has to be something that's legally prescribed. Code principle number 6, actively include all individuals. This is the principle that incorporates another section of the Yoga Alliance ethical commitment, and that is equity in yoga, where you do what you can to include everyone, no matter what their ability or constraint that they might have. So, it also includes making reasonable accommodations. This is where if you are aware of a student in your class who has some kind of constraints, you would give them modifications for yoga positions so they can feel like they're included and they're getting what they need out of the class. It also talks about things that are more applicable to the business of yoga, that unless you open your own studio, you don't have to be concerned about physical access to the rooms and things like that. Code Principle 7, respect student-teacher relationships. This is where the provisions are around consent-based touch, explicit and informed consent. So the code describes exactly what it means by consent. In the second sentence under section A, explicit and informed consent can be given verbally, in writing, by an unambiguous gesture, or via a consent indicator. Silence or lack of resistance in and of itself does not demonstrate consent. So a consent indicator, if any of you have come to my introduction to Reiki training sessions, classes, I give everybody a green, yellow, and red card. And rather than having them verbally tell me whether I can touch them, they put out a red card if they don't want touch. They put out a green card if they're okay with touch during the Reiki session. So that would be considered a consent indicator. So the other important part of, yeah.
I was in her class recently, and I think it's important to point out that one of the students, you weren't sure if it was red or green, and always err on the side of not touching.
Right. Yeah, the student had a red card close to her and a green card a little farther away. And I came over and I was like, I guess the green card is what she was putting out there. And so I started with my hands on top of her head, and then I'm like, no, I'm not so sure about that. So I did the rest of the session hands off. And it turns out she didn't want me to touch her. So I apologized for my hands on her head for a minute or so, and she was fine with that. So err on the side of not touching if it's ambiguous. So at the bottom of this section, it says previous consent does not imply future permission or allow for future physical adjustment or contact of any type. That means that someone's permission doesn't go to the next class. It's that class. In fact, if it's at the beginning of that class and you're asking permission again later on, and if they're silent or they don't give you an indicator, then don't touch them. They're not getting permission. Then section B of Code Principle 7, romantic and or sexual relations.
Hey, Gail, did the screen freeze for you?
Yep, it's frozen now.
Okay, let me call them.
Thanks.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, thanks, Rita. I'll give them a call.
And a yoga teacher, there's lots of yoga teachers.
Debbie, we're back on.
That establishing a relationship with a yoga teacher can, is much more amorphous. Establishing a relationship with a therapist, you obviously don't have that option of developing a romantic relationship with your client. It's prohibited by our ethics. But yoga teachers, there's not the same type of deep emotional relationship necessarily. And you can always, take another class. It isn't like you establish a therapeutic alliance with a yoga instructor. So if if feelings develop, then the best option is to say, why don't you take classes from somebody else? Part of the reason that that's significant is not necessarily because of the boundary between you and the student, but it's the perception of the boundary between you and the student by other students or by other teachers. Remember, you're creating a power differential by being a yoga teacher, and that power differential is noticed by everybody, not just the person that you're mutually interested in. So your actions toward a particular student may not be offensive to that student, but it might be offensive to someone else in the class. And so that's part of your responsibility to create the space that's safe for everybody by following these guidelines. The only other thing I'll point out in Code Principle 7 is Section D, which is a consent to record. Don't take pictures in class unless you check with Linda or somebody in charge of the studio so that they can tell you how to do that safely and with consent.
Just really quick, we do have a consent that everybody signs whenever they become a member or any package that they purchase anytime they take a class. But if you are, unless Beth or myself will talk to you directly about it, we usually will ask you or speak to you if we need a picture, if you want to take a picture.
Yeah. And, a lot of times students will say, wow, I just did my first inversion. Can you take a picture of me? That's consent. Obviously they're giving you their camera, their phone. Code Principle 8, maintain honesty in communications. Section A talks about your honesty of who you are and what training you have, what expertise you have. It also talks about being honest about other people's material and expertise and not plagiarizing. And then it talks about, finally in that section, yoga in general. Don't make unsubstantiated claims about yoga to your students so that they set up expectations that are unattainable. If you need information about scientific articles about the effectiveness of yoga, then you're welcome to contact me because that's one of my areas of interest is alternative therapies and their scientific research that supports them.
Can I add to that really quick? For yoga teachers who are sharing quotes or themes, make sure you share the name of the person who is giving the quote. If not, they'll assume it's your quote. Sometimes I'll do this with Tom, so I'm like, sometimes I'll say it even casually. So I'll say, I stole this from Tom, but it's such a great quote. And it's important to give credit, even if it's, not word for word, to the person that has influenced you for that specific theme or quote or story that you're sharing.
All right. Section B under Code Principle 8, local resources. This is an important aspect. And we'll get to this more in the scope of practice, you're not trained unless you're trained and licensed to do mental health work. So generally that's beyond your scope of practice. It's not part of the yoga teacher training. And so you will often be seen as a person of authority that might have some information or some help, but you need to have some resources to send people out to so that they can get good help for the things that they're asking you about. So mental health professionals, law enforcement, suicide prevention hotline, sexual abuse hotline, and yoga alliance are always good things to have readily available to refer your students to. I'm going to skip over section C, cultural responsibility. I'll let you read that on your own. Section D, individual responsibility, basically is you have a responsibility to continue your education and improve your practice and your growth as you move further into being a yoga teacher. The code of conduct under application includes all online spaces, including social media. So if you are, if you've got a Facebook page that's, I'm RYT, then you're putting out there your expertise, and that's all of this applies to anything you do or say on social media as well. The last paragraph of the code there says that the Yoga Alliance can investigate allegations of violations regardless of membership status with Yoga Alliance at the time of the incident. So that if you do something and then a year later you become a member of the Yoga Alliance, and they can investigate you for something that happened in the past. Any questions about the code of conduct? All right, let's move on to scope of practice. This again is embedded within the code of conduct, and I'm going to just hit some highlights because I don't want to run out of time. So the definition of yoga is in the last sentence in the first paragraph of the preamble on the second page. The Sanskrit word yoga includes and additionally describes both an optimal unitive state of consciousness as well as the techniques, philosophies, practices, and lifestyles that bring one into such a state. So yoga, they say, is a polythetic system. That means there's lots of different definitions and ways you can do yoga. It's got ancient and long history, and they're saying that anything that in your practice that you consider yoga is part of the scope of practice. So on page 3, there's 6 principles in the scope of practice, and again, they reference each other. So scope of practice principle 1 basically says you have to follow the Alliance Code of Conduct, which we just covered. And it lists all 8 of the Code of Conduct principles there. Standard of practice principle 2, teach yoga. This basically says if you have the expertise and the training, then teach that. If you don't have the expertise and the training, don't teach that. So yoga philosophy, the lineage, style, and methodology for which the member is qualified. And the Yoga Alliance also sets the core curriculum standards that your teacher training follow, which I understand are being adjusted in the next year or 2. So
This year, 2021, they've already started to roll it out, but they're making it effective February 2020.
Yeah. So scope of practice principle 3, adjust posture or practice with explicit and informed consent. Again, we've covered that in the Code of Conduct. it's pretty much put in the exact same language here. Scope of practice principle 4, share and cite yogic philosophy, history, and anatomy. So one of the things that happens over time with different areas of expertise is that as they get more and more into the mainstream of American culture, there's a confluence of making it more and more evidence-based. And so this is an example of trying to help people move into standard practices instead of just doing whatever you want to do and calling it yoga. So they're trying to narrow the scope of what qualifies as the standard of care for yoga practice. That's why they list these different teachings. They list degreed scholars in D and E. So they're basically trying to standardize the practice of yoga under their umbrella as the Yoga Alliance. Scope of practice principle 5, advise and teach within permitted scope. So under A, members must not provide advice or services for which they are not properly and currently licensed. So again, that means what you learned in your teacher training, you're now qualified to teach. What's outside of your teacher training, you're not licensed or qualified to teach unless you've got some other training. So I have an example of that. I've actually asked for and received informed consent for sharing this information, but I am a student in Lacey's class on a regular basis, and we had a discussion a few weeks ago about Kundalini yoga, which is not something that you guys, get qualified to teach in your teacher training. And so, we're both Lacey and I were interested in it. I happen to have a book by Swami called Kundalini Yoga for the West, which I think is a phenomenal book. So rather than saying, well, here's what I know, blah, 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 I'm not qualified to teach Kundalini Yoga. So I just loaned her the book, and she's like, wow, that's great. I'm gonna buy the book. So neither one of us are qualified to teach Kundalini Yoga. We've talked about doing a kind of a study group and maybe trying to find someone to train under, but that's where you know the scope of your practice and you are always learning more and moving into it, but not putting yourself out there as a teacher when you don't have the qualifications. And thanks for giving me the time to identify you. So, scope of practice principle 6, maintain relevant credentials. So again, this is continuing education requirements and following all Yoga Alliance policies and procedures. So in the final section of this scope of practice section, it talks about the difference between when you are in the social setting as a yoga instructor or teacher and when you're in purely private conduct. And that second paragraph there talks about purely private conduct, and then the third paragraph says Yoga Alliance members should be committed to developing strong ethical principles in their professional and personal lives. The Yoga Alliance can't require you to follow their ethical commitments in your private life, but it's a whole lot easier to just have those ethical commitments through your life, private and public, and then you don't have to, differentiate or know when you're supposed to follow the principles and when you're not. Any questions about the scope of practice section?
I'd like to just point out that I've been a massage therapist since 2004, and if there are yoga teachers, it's very common that they have other health and wellness certifications or are licensed in that. So herbal medicine, Reiki is another certification that a lot of yoga teachers do. It's still important that you get permission to, for instance, someone is doing a class and they're incorporating Reiki at the end. I think that's great, but you still have to get that permission at the end as well. And also make sure that you are trained in it, and that you have a level 1 at least minimum, or basics of whatever you're going to be doing within your class. Because there's also the yoga and sound healing, right? Don't just watch a YouTube video and incorporate it. Take the class, get certified. You don't have to be an expert, like have 10 years of experience in it, but you at least need to have the basic understanding, knowledge, and a certification saying you took the course so you can incorporate it in there. As a licensed massage therapist, I may talk about certain approaches in the body based on my experience with, like, let's say, myoskeletally release, but I was trained in that. So again, just keep that in mind as a yoga teacher. If you want to infuse anything that you are trained in, to make sure that you let them know I'm trained, or again, asking for permission if you're going to incorporate it into the class.
All right, thank you, Linda. So we've got a couple more policies to go over. One is the anti-harassment policy. Before I go into that, let me just give you an overview of how a yoga teacher could get into trouble. There's basically 3 different ways that someone could assert that you've done something wrong. Obviously, if there's if you've touched someone sexually without their consent, there's criminal statutes, right? There's sexual assault statutes and things like that. So there's a criminal exposure. There's also civil exposure. So we've seen lots of news about powerful men who are getting sued by women who feel like they've violated them in some way. That you can be sued civilly if you can prove that you've been harmed in some way, and that's usually a monetary reward rather than criminal, which is freedom restraint. You can get put into jail. The third way that you can have exposure is administrative. And that's basically what we're focusing on today, is administrative procedures that could be initiated against you for violating the code of conduct or the scope of practice or the anti-harassment or the sexual misconduct policy. So administrative procedures are where you are a member of the Yoga Alliance and someone files a grievance. So that's kind of the area we're moving into now. We aren't really covering today the criminal procedures or the civil procedures. We're focusing on the administrative procedures. So let's turn now to the anti-harassment policy by the Yoga Alliance. Again, this was updated in February of 2020. This again is supportive of the idea that you're creating safe space for people when you teach a yoga class. And so The tricky part of harassment is it's not what you think is appropriate or not appropriate, it's what students think and what is reasonably expected to be either offensive or not offensive. And I'll get into that in a little more detail. If you look at the first section there under prohibited conduct, the first, the paragraph number 1 is a list of protected identities. So age, gender, gender identity, pronoun use, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, culture, national origin, religion, body type, personal appearance, physical or mental ability, socioeconomic status, marital status, political activities or affiliation, or any other basis prescribed by local, state, provincial, national, and federal laws and regulations. That's a pretty comprehensive list of identities that are protected in this harassment policy. The second paragraph, second numbered paragraph, is a list of types of activities that could be considered harassing or venues. This is actually the short definition. There's a longer definition. You have on the next page a section called definitions. Did you guys get that? Okay. Under definitions, the last paragraph before retaliation is the full list of the types and venues. So what we know about administrative law is that if there's a short definition in one section and a longer definition in the other, the longer definition rules. So let's look at that long definition on the next page. Harassment includes, but is not limited to, offensive verbal comments related to age, gender, etc., etc. I won't go through that list again. Deliberate intimidation, stalking, following, harassing photography or recording, sustained and intentional disruption of class or other events, and inappropriate physical contact. Those are all within the definition of harassment according to the anti-harassment policy. So jumping back up to that first paragraph under harassment, under definitions, there's 3 different ways that you can see harassment. 1, the conduct denigrates or shows hostility or aversion towards the person and has the purpose or effect of unreasonably interfering with their work, study, or other activity. Their other activity includes coming to a yoga class. 2, enduring the offensive conduct becomes a condition of the continued relationship. So if there's a teacher and they let everybody know their, say, political orientation, then, and you don't agree with their political orientation, you've got to push through that difference to go to that class that you like the way that they teach, but you don't necessarily like what they're saying about the politics of the day. And or number 3, the conduct has the purpose or effect of creating an environment that a reasonable person would consider intimidating, hostile, or abusive. This is what in administrative law is called the reasonable person standard. It's not whether the individual finds it offensive. You know, you might say, well, you just offended me by bringing up politics. Well, is that what a reasonable person would be offended by? Because I didn't say anything about my politics or your politics. I just used it as an example of ways that people disagree with things right now. So if and when a investigation is started against a yoga teacher, they use the reasonable person standard to see whether it would appear to be intimidating, hostile, or abusive to a reasonable person, not necessarily to that individual. And that's an important part. So then after harassment, under definitions, it talks about retaliation. Retaliation is making any adverse action or threat against an individual who reports prohibited conduct or participates in an investigation. So, any questions about the anti-harassment policy? All right. Let's go to the last one, which is the sexual misconduct policy. I understand that you may not have gotten the full policy, but let me take a look at one and see how much detail you guys have.
Here, yeah, that's one.
You got one? Okay, so you do have prohibited conduct, but you don't have procedures. Yeah, okay. So, sexual misconduct policy is, again, put into place to provide people with a safe space to come and do yoga classes. The important thing, it's hard to pull it out of what you've got, but let me just read what I've got highlighted here. It's about halfway down what you have. If you have experienced sexual misconduct in yoga and are unsure about making a report, please email grievance@yogaalliance.org. An accountability advisor will contact you to hold space and answer any questions you have about the investigative process, and will not move forward with an investigation without your express consent. So the important part of this is that it's not always a clear case, and you can contact them and have them help you walk through whether or not to file something. What's important about the sexual misconduct policy is the only person that can file a grievance is the person who feels like they were violated. As a teacher, if you see somebody violated, you can't file a grievance against the person that did the violation. Only the person who has received the behavior is able to file a grievance, and they can call and find out whether they want to follow through with it or not. The list of prohibited contact is on your handout, and it lists a lot of different types of sexual misconduct, not just touch, but verbal. It has different types of creating space that directs people toward sex and makes people uncomfortable. So, including asking someone about their sexual experiences or discussing your own. So, Again, there's a section on retaliation and how that is prohibited against someone who feels like they need to report. So you don't have the rest of this policy, but I'm going to walk you through what happens. Again, report can only be initiated by the individual who has personally experienced sexual misconduct as defined in this policy. In the interest of safety and privacy, Yoga Alliance will not initiate an investigation based upon a third-party report of violations under the policy. So unless you are the person aggrieved, you can't file a grievance. When someone decides to file a grievance, the policy has a list of things that they need to include. Your full name, your email and phone number, full name of the respondent, a description of the conduct alleged to have violated the policy, the date and location of the alleged conduct, names and contact information of witnesses, and if necessary, a request for an exemption of the 2-year time limit for reporting a grievance. So there's a 2-year window to file a grievance unless you can show that there's some reason why that 2-year time limit should be waived. So what happens after a grievance is filed? The accountability department reviews it. If they have other questions or it's incomplete, they require information. They ask the reporter to convey the additional information within 21 days. If they determine that an investigation is needed, then they'll open an investigation. They will talk to the person filing the grievance, the respondent, and any witnesses that are identified, all of those individually, so that they can gather the information they need. While they're doing the investigation, they have the option of suspending credentials. And then they maintain confidentiality as best they can. Obviously, if you're a respondent, you're gonna have an idea of who the person is because of the alleged conduct, which they'll review with you. The standard of proof in an administrative investigation is a preponderance of the evidence. That's a lower standard than a criminal proceeding, which the criminal proceeding is beyond a reasonable doubt. A preponderance of the evidence is 51%, more likely than not. So one of the difficulties in being the subject of administrative investigation is if there's no witnesses, then it's your word against the other person's word. And that gets pretty dicey to figure out if there's not other evidence that can be used. After the investigation, Yoga Alliance gives a notice of the decision and can discipline the member from education, like take a ethics course or something, all the way up to revocation of their Yoga Alliance credentials and membership. Either party has a right to appeal within 21 days of the notice of decision. It's not a fun process. It's not even if you have a complaint filed against you and you didn't do anything wrong, it still can be excruciating as a process, which then means if you back that up, that's why you maintain such healthy boundaries at all times with all of your all of your students and all of your classes. All right, so any questions?
I'd like to add to that, that includes online as well.
Right.
So, one of the things that Tom and I had reached out to him in email last night and said, what about social media? Because I think it's something that wasn't, I didn't really find a lot of information in Yoga Alliance about social media, but I'd just like to share with you that is just as important relationship online as it is in person, because as you know, most people are online now, whether it's they're taking online classes or they're on your Facebook or Instagram or they check out your website. So I would say to have those boundaries even across the internet.
Yeah, absolutely. And, good relations means if you have a disagreement with somebody, talk to them. Have a neutral party, meet with you and the other person and talk it out and, see if you can come to a common ground or an understanding. Take responsibility for your actions. If they're misinterpreted by somebody, apologize. Say that wasn't my intention. I'm sorry that made you uncomfortable. Just like I did with the person that, had the red card and I thought she had a green card out, And that prevention is a pound of cure. That's going to avoid any kind of continued misperception. So, anything else before we do the exam? So, how we're going to do the exam is I've got the exam and an exam score sheet that you'll get to keep the exam as we go over it, and we'll take the score sheet and see how you did.
Use your restroom real quick.
Yeah.
For those of you at home, I emailed you a copy of if you're taking this live Zoom, I emailed you a copy of the exam. If you're watching this pre-recorded Zoom class, then you will also get the exam via email. And what I'd like you to do is just answer the questions, and you can email them back to me, and I will then score it from there. You can certainly do it now if you can. If you have it printed out, that would be great. Just get it done. That would be the best approach. If you don't have a printer or not able to print it out now, that's okay as well. But please get it to me no later than I would say by Monday evening. So again, it's titled the Course in Yoga Ethics Exam, and you should have all gotten that. You guys okay over there on Zoom? Hi, Gail.
Good.
Okay.
Thanks.
So Linda, we can send it back to you through email. Is that what you said?
Yeah, so you're going to just take the Course in Yoga Ethics Exam.
Right.
And just answer the questions, put your name, you print it here with the date. It's a front and back sheet, unless you print it out 2 pages. And you can either take a picture of it and email it back to me, would be best. And then from there, I would just score it and email you back how you did.
Sounds good. Thank you.
You will get 2 continuing education units once you complete the exam. So I will once you complete and pass the exam, I will email you how to get those credits on Yoga Alliance.
Hey, Linda, quick question. Since you sent this in a Word format, can we just like answer it in Word, fill it out? If that way we don't have to.
I think I sent the last one that I sent, which was an updated one from Tom. I think it's not in a PDF.
Yeah, this one's a Word. It says a Course in Yoga Ethics exam, 2 pages, multiple choice, and then a true or false section. Is that?
Mhm. Yeah, if it's in Word, that's fine. It doesn't matter. Whatever is best. If you want to email me the answers, if you don't want to print it out, you can do that too.
I'm just out of ink, but
Yeah, I know. That happened to me this morning.
I go through it like
The Staples doesn't open till later, and but anyways, it's a lot to print out. So I'm glad that you guys are able to follow along on the links. So you guys were able to follow along fine.
yeah, everything
Okay.
was good. Except
Good,
for
good, good.
I think Tom had a handout that you didn't email us.
Yeah, he just gave it to us today. So I'll make sure to include that. And when I'm done with this workshop, I'll send it over to you guys.
Okay, thank you.
And that's one thing I will talk about really quick before we finish is that last part was talking about dual relationships. I think that's a very, that's an important one we need to chat about real quick before we end.
What do we need to gather?
The dual relationship before we take the exam, just cover that one more time. And for the June, people, they also are going to just answer the questions on an email and send it to me.
Okay,
I'll just-
and we're gonna go over.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I might not get everybody's emails on time, so we'll go over theirs.
Okay.
So yeah, at home on Zoom, please follow along and we will go from there.
I'm sorry, should we be taking the exam now, or are we going to talk about dual relationships?
We're about to take the exam.
Okay.
Yeah.
They're taking the exam.
If you are, they're
Yeah.
starting, okay, you guys can start now, sorry.
It's not a timed exam, so go ahead and start it, and we'll go over the answers after everybody's done.
Is there only one answer for each question? I know, right? And like number one, I feel like there could be two.
There is one answer for each question.
Go with the straight one.
And it could be that I'm out of practice in constructive questions.
notes or anything like that.
Yeah, you might want to mark your answers on the exam that you're going to keep on there. I'll take the answer sheets. Thank you.
From yoga teacher training.
So that I was done with tests.
Well, the good news is this yoga ethics credit that you're gonna get through Yoga Alliance, you won't have to worry about it for at least 3 more years, so. You are required to take it. Part of your continuing education has to be in ethics. So, and Yoga Alliance, does, look at your credits, you know, for you renew your certification or your registered training. They're getting stricter.
So how, maybe during this later on, how do we report this or how do we notify them?
I will send you all an email list, for those at home too, anybody who takes it, with, how to go to your Yoga Alliance page. And, you'll get my number, and then you'll be able to get it.
Yeah, you can use it for this.
Yeah, 15th through the 16th.
The 17th. It might even be the 18th.
Where the days are.
Yeah, the 17th.
How are you guys doing at home?
Linda,
Yes.
hi, this is Elena. I'm not able to, what's happened is I think when I went to print it, it's frozen and I'm getting all of the little wheel things. So I haven't even started the exam.
That's
yet.
okay. You can email the answers if that's easier, like reading it and then email it.
Okay.
If you don't want to print it, if you can't print it, it's okay.
But do I have to do that right now or within the period of time that we're having this class or?
What do you think, Tom?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's okay if you want to do it now. And then we'll,
It's only 4 questions.
yeah. You want to go ahead and try to answer them now?
Well, right now I'm not able to access it. Okay. I'm still working on that, but I wasn't sure if we were.
Okay, so it's okay. Just do it later, and then that way I can give you the continuing education credit.
Okay.
But
fine.
you can listen to us now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Gail, Luke, and Rita, you guys good too?
Yep, good. Getting ready to email you answers.
Okay, great.
But I shouldn't be listening to the answers if I haven't done it yet, correct?
I'm gonna let Tom answer that.
Well, I can get off if you want. But I've
You
got,
want to mute us for a moment, Elena?
sure.
Okay. I'll tell you what, Elena, when I tell you to unmute, I'll give you a thumbs up.
Hold on. Or I can just leave and come back. Okay, wait a minute.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Betty is a yoga teacher who's not currently in a committed relationship. Her full-time job is a real estate agent, a member of the yoga studio. Who frequents Betty's class. During one of Betty's classes, she noticed Bob spent a lengthy period of time in child's pose and seemed to be crying. After class, Bob waited around until the other students left the studio and then began a conversation with Betty, informing her that he just separated from his wife and would like to get a cup of coffee or tea and talk to Betty because he trusts her. Under the Yoga Alliance's scope and practice guidelines, Betty's best course of action would be to, what do you think?
Provide him with referrals or help.
Provide him with referrals to a mental health professional. Why not A?
I did A.
This is the one I thought there could be too, because he's kind of already told you, so you kind of want to be compassionate. You want to be like, oh, shut up, sorry, I can't listen to you. You want to be like, I'm sorry that's happened to you. Let me get you Tom's car. He's a great therapist down in Frederick. You know what I mean? So I felt like it's kind of too, because he's already told you what's going on. You might be like,
Yeah.
don't talk to me.
Okay. So, yeah, if
But not
I
going to details.
constructed the question better, I would put in for A, continue to lend a compassionate ear, but, you kind of move him toward something that is out of your expertise, right? If you're not licensed as a therapist, and it sounds like he needs that, so you just say, oh, I'm sorry that's happened to you. I know there's some good therapists in town. Let me give you a couple of names. Okay? So, the biggest problem with A is that it could lead down a slippery slope where he comes back to you every week and is like, hey, can we talk some more? And, that type of thing. So,
Even online, they can reach out to you, not just in person, but they might message you if you're on Instagram or social media. Make sure that you follow, your code of conduct and your scope of practice, even online.
all right, number 2, you're a new yoga teacher, you're teaching foundations, student starts attending your class. You guys have a mutual attraction. Your best course of action is
E.
I could see. That was like sushi.
why A?
It's better safe than sorry, right? There's like, how many of us now? 20 yoga teachers here. There's 19 other relationships from we're gonna have relationship fees in the class.
Okay. Yeah.
I did A.
I mean, it doesn't say they're
Starting a relationship.
Yeah, again, those, that they realize.
They realize they have an attraction to each other. Is that the point where you have to stop pretending? Or is it just that you enter into a relationship?
What if it's just transference and counter-transference? It's not really an attraction.
Well, then you'll realize that once you put it in class. You're like, oh, I get to attract right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. The best answer is E.
Oh, so tricky.
Yeah. I wanted to do C and D. Like, I would definitely tell.
You need to consult with someone. You're a new teacher. Don't think that you know it all or have faced everything. Go talk to somebody. Go talk to somebody been teaching, who's in charge of the studio, get somebody into your circle so that you can make your best decision. It could be that, it was just kind of a, 1 or 2 week attraction, and then, you both woke up and said, I don't like that person at all. Or, I'm not attracted to them like I thought I was. Then you've, maybe started a course of action that you don't necessarily go through. But talking to someone who's walked that path before, or who sees the bigger picture will help out a lot.
And it's tricky, like in the moment, like you're experiencing that, you don't want to jump to conclusions. So sometimes it is good to get someone else's feedback, or maybe they can share an experience that they had and how they dealt with it.
We've all been attracted to people. We all know what that feels like when it's new, right? What we do when we're attracted to somebody is we know very little about that person, and we fill in everything we don't know with good stuff, right? Wow, well, they must be, a great parent, or, whatever it is. We fill it all in, all of that good stuff, because our brain is giving us oxytocin, which is the trust molecule. And so we're filling it all in and saying they're, walking on water. And then over time, the facts of who each of us is start coming in and replacing that projection of their wonderful person. So, it's not new relationships, new attractions are always fraught with that possibility that you're going to misjudge who that person is, and not necessarily because you need to judge them, but because you may not be a good fit, and you'll learn that over time. So the best choice is to bring someone into your circle that has expertise and experience to help direct you in that way. All right, number 3. What's the best answer there? Looks like most of you got that one. E. All 3 of those. Yep. Could be any or all of them. All right. True and false. Number 4. If a student initiates or encourages a sexual relationship with a teacher, that student cannot later make a claim of sexual misconduct against that teacher.
False.
False.
Why is that false?
Because you're in a relationship with me, you can't do that misconduct.
Okay, but they gave consent, didn't they?
Consent can be withdrawn at any time.
Right. Yep, that's false. And even if they don't withdraw consent, they can still file a grievance, right? I mean, it doesn't. You don't get some immunity card because somebody initiated a inappropriate relationship.
And
There's still that power differential. You're in the place of power. They're not as a student. You are as a teacher, and they're not as a student.
that's exactly what I was going to say. Because of your title as a teacher, regardless if there was consent or not, you pretty much know better, bottom line. And they can, even if it's within 2 years or even after 2 years, they'll report you.
All right, number 5. When a person who was in your YTT class, or a person you know to be a yoga teacher, attends your yoga class, it's okay to point out their asana during the class as a model without asking them first. You all got this one right. Yet you still have to get consent, right? I just this week, I went to a yoga class at Fredericksburg House of Yoga and saw someone that I knew that taught at another studio. And nobody else knew this person but me. And she came up and we were talking, and I said, "Hey, it's good to see you here." She's like, "Yeah, I just wanted to go someplace that nobody was watching me." You know, we all want that at times, where we all just want to get on the mat and practice, right? So I thought it was beautiful that she picked our studio to come and do that. So unless you get consent from even your friends, you need to leave them alone.
We had a really quick, recently a baseball player came to our studio, and I did let the teacher know, but not so much so that we can make a big announcement, even though I really wanted to, but because most importantly, and I knew my boundary was like, no, this person is coming here to experience solitude, possibly even besides fitness, and just having the experience of yoga, not being known for this title or anything like that. But it's important, whether it's a student or someone even you know, that you understand that every time is different. And just because they gave you consent last week may be different this week.
All right. So 6, 7, and 8, you all got all right. So you're all correct on them. 6 is false. 7 is true. And 8 is false. Good job. And it's 11 o'clock. I just realized that I didn't do any evaluation forms. So
Maybe we can email you an evaluation form of the ethics class, and you can send it back.
and if you have any, if you'd like to give a verbal comment about the class before we wrap up, I'd be happy to hear any feedback you have.
Elena Procos, thumbs up. You can listen in now if you like. Any feedback or comments, questions?
Only maybe on the exam with the first question and maybe the second one that were a little tricky. Maybe just a little different wording.
Yeah, I'll work on those.
That's about it.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was a little hard. Even for me, I was like,
Yeah.
So yeah,
I think it's good because it's a head scratcher. I mean,
it's
it's
not
like if you fail, you get them wrong, you're gonna fail. It opens up the topic. As long as you get that reassurance that like we all passed.
Yeah. Even if you know these things, it's good to be reminded of them, so you have them forefront your mind.
Yeah, I think through
Absolutely.
scenarios, talk through scenarios.
I might actually make this a yearly requirement for all of our staff, only because I think it is important to remember our scope of practice and keeping that consistent through our whole team. And even if you teach, if you're, watching this online and you're teaching on your own, having a refreshed perspective on it because of the experiences you have under your belt now. So a year from now, based on what you're, as a new teacher and new places that you're teaching, you're gonna probably look at this a little bit differently. Or, you'll resonate more with one thing or another thing. And so I think it is good to have a new perspective on it, and hopefully you'll join us next year.
And I think it's important to remember that we're all learning. So it's okay to make a mistake. Just, do your best to learn from it and correct it, and get better and better at holding that space for people, because that's what a lot of people are coming here for. And we're in particularly volatile clearing time in the world. So, people are looking for that space that you provide, and you guys do a great job. So thank you all.
Can we get like some cards, or a card with like numbers for like the suicide hotline and
Yeah, that's
local
great.
therapists for the lobby or something? That way all the teachers have. We don't have
That's
to
a
look up
really
their
good
phone.
point, yes.
You might look at how to, we can just put it on
Yeah,
that
you
little
can just put it
ledge.
inside, that
Or
way if it does come
inside.
up, you know where to go, so find it, you're not like, hold on, let me Google
Right.
it for you.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Tom, can I put you on that for if you need
Well-
seat counseling? Are you?
Well, like here, we have like cards in the front, but we don't really have that in the other studios.
Maybe like 800 numbers for like suicide
Yeah.
prevention, rate.
And then the, what's the PTSD
domestic
one for like
battery.
military or something?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Number.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Resource card.
Yeah, so I was thinking that out, that just Google something, I had that right there.
Before we end, I just want to share with you that we are giving you 2 credits for this continuing education course. It is through Yoga Online. So you will be getting an email from me along with the, what was that sheet with the 5, sorry?
The glossary.
Yes, with the 5 terms, the glossary terms that, at home, I didn't give you that link, I'll send that over to you. So you also get a link to Yoga Alliance on, this course and how you can register your credits. All right,
Thank you all.
thank you for
Thanks.
coming, thank you at home,
Thank you at home.
have a great, beautiful day, namaste.